Max Verstappen did not win Nürburgring, but he still created the comparison Mercedes did not want around Kimi Antonelli. That is the story. Not a scandal, not a fake transfer rumor, not Mercedes secretly reacting to Max in real time. The real story is simpler and more uncomfortable. Max went to the Nürburgring 24 hours in a Mercedes AMG GT3. His car had real pace. It was in the fight before a late technical problem took away the chance of victory. Then Antonelli became part of the conversation because reports said he wanted to pursue the Nordschleife permit route as well. Mercedes' answer was clear. Not this year. That is where the story becomes bigger than one race. Because Max was allowed to chase one of the hardest races in the world. Antonelli was told to wait. And the difference is not talent. It is status. Max is already a proven champion. Antonelli is still being built inside the Mercedes system. That is the entire tension. For Verstappen, Nürburgring looked like freedom. For Antonelli, Nürburgring looked like a risk Mercedes did not want to carry yet. The public version is easy. Mercedes protected a young driver, a dangerous track, an active Formula One season, a future star, and no need to add risk. That explanation makes sense. But what most broadcasts missed is that Verstappen had just shown why the temptation exists in the first place. Nürburgring is not a normal circuit. It is long, narrow, dangerous, unpredictable, and full of traffic. It is the kind of place where a driver cannot hide behind a perfect Formula One environment. There are blind crests, there are changing conditions, there are slower cars, there are night stints, there are walls waiting for one mistake, and Max wanted that. He did not go there as a showpiece. He went there with a serious entry, serious teammates, and a car capable of fighting near the front. That matters, because if Verstappen had been slow, this story would have ended as a weekend hobby. But he was not slow. The car was competitive, the performance was real, the failure was mechanical. The result says Max missed the win, the meaning says Max belonged there. And that is why Antonelli wanting the same path becomes so interesting. A young driver sees the most complete driver in Formula One step outside the series and still look natural. Of course that creates interest, but Mercedes does not see that interest the same way fans do. Fans see hunger, Mercedes sees risk, fans see a driver wanting to grow. Mercedes sees a Formula One asset that is still being protected. That is the hidden conflict. The same racing instinct that makes Antonelli exciting is the same instinct Mercedes has to manage carefully, because Mercedes is not just building a driver, Mercedes is building a future, and when a team is building a future, it does not let every dream become a calendar decision. So the timeline is important. First, Verstappen enters Nürburgring in a Mercedes AMG GT3. Second, the car proves it is not just there for attention. Third, a late technical problem takes away the result. Fourth, Antonelli becomes connected to the same Nordschleife idea. Fifth, Mercedes says not this year. Each step by itself is reasonable. Together they reveal the divide. Max has earned enough trust to choose danger. Antonelli has not yet earned enough power to own that same risk. And that is why the car failure did not kill the story. It made the story cleaner, because Max did not need the trophy to prove the point. He only needed to show that he could step outside Formula One and still look completely at home. That is what Mercedes has to manage with Antonelli. Not just safety, not just development, the comparison. Because once a young Mercedes driver wants the same challenge Max just took on, Mercedes has to decide whether it is building a racer, protecting an investment, or trying to do both at the same time. And that is where the next layer begins. Script 2, 4:15 to 10:30. The same risk looks different depending on the driver. For Verstappen, Nürburgring is a racing challenge. For Antonelli, Nürburgring is a management decision. That difference explains almost everything. Max Verstappen is not treated like a normal Formula One driver anymore. He is already a multiple world champion. His value has been proven on the biggest stage. He has carried pressure, titles, regulation changes, teammate comparisons, and the kind of scrutiny that turns normal drivers into cautionary stories. That history gives him leverage. A team can advise Max, a team can negotiate with Max. But it cannot treat him like a junior driver whose every move has to be approved as part of a long-term development plan. Antonelli's in a different position. He may be extremely talented. He may be the future of Mercedes, but that is exactly why Mercedes has to be careful. A future star is not managed like a finished champion. A future star is protected, shaped, timed, and positioned. That is why the Mercedes answer makes sense. If Antonelli goes to the Nordschleife and something goes wrong, it does not stay a GT story. It becomes a Mercedes Formula One story immediately. If he crashes, people ask why Mercedes allowed it. If he struggles, people compare him to Verstappen. If he impresses, the hype grows before Mercedes may want it to grow. Every outcome carries noise. That is the part people miss. Mercedes is not afraid of Nürburgring itself. Mercedes AMG had just won the Nürburgring 24 hours with another car. The brand had every reason to celebrate the race. So this is not Mercedes saying the event has no value. It is Mercedes saying the value is different when the driver is Antonelli. A factory GT program can take that risk. A Formula One future star is different. That is hierarchy, and hierarchy is how Formula One works. Inside the paddock, freedom is rarely equal. It is earned, it is negotiated. It is connected to results, titles, contract value, and how much damage a team can absorb if something goes wrong. Max can take the risk because his career does not need that race to explain itself. Antonelli cannot take the same risk yet because Mercedes is still writing his explanation. That is the core of the story. One driver already owns his narrative. The other is still inside a team narrative, and that is why the word timing matters. Mercedes did not need to say Antonelli can never do it. It only needed to say not now. Not now is very different from never. Not now means the team is still deciding the right moment. Not now means Formula One comes first. Not now means the risk does not currently serve the plan. That is a rational position, but rational decisions can still reveal power, because when Max wants a difficult race, it looks like passion. When Antonelli wants one, it becomes a meeting. That is the difference between freedom and permission. And it gets even clearer when you look at what Nürburgring represents. This is not just a racetrack, it is a test of judgment. It rewards patience, traffic reading, adaptability, and respect for danger. It exposes drivers who are only comfortable when the environment is controlled. That is why Max doing it matters. He was not chasing a sponsor event. He was chasing a type of racing that Formula One does not really offer anymore. Formula One is precise, structured, restricted, and heavily managed. Nürburgring is messy, long, dangerous, and alive. Max wanted the messy version. That fits who he is. Antonelli wanting the same thing also makes racing sense. A young driver wants the hard challenge. A young driver wants credibility. A young driver wants to prove he can do more than the narrow Formula One schedule. But Mercedes is not paid to satisfy every racing instinct. Mercedes is paid to protect the Formula One program. That is the contradiction. Teams love drivers who are hungry. They love it when hunger sells confidence, bravery, and future greatness. But when that hunger moves outside the controlled Formula One world, the team has to decide how much it really wants. Mercedes wants Antonelli brave, but Mercedes wants that bravery inside its plan. That is not an insult, that is business. And it is also the cleanest reframe of the whole story. This is not mainly about whether Antonelli should be allowed to race at Nürburgring. It is about who owns the risk. When Max races there, the risk belongs mostly to Max. His reputation is strong enough, his titles are already won. If the car fails, the story is still that Max was competitive. When Antonelli wants to go there, the risk belongs to Mercedes. His career is still being introduced to the world, his image is still fragile, his place in the team story is still developing. That means Mercedes carries the consequence. A crash would be a Mercedes question. A bad weekend would be a Mercedes question. A distraction before key Formula One races would be a Mercedes question. So Mercedes says no for now, and by saying no, it shows the boundary. Max is treated like someone who can choose his own risk. Antonelli is treated like someone whose risk still belongs to the team. That is not because Mercedes doubts his talent. It is because Mercedes values his future. But that is the uncomfortable part. The more valuable a young driver becomes, the more carefully the team controls him. Protection and control often look the same from the outside. And this story sits right in the middle of that line. Max has the keys, Antonelli is still waiting for permission. Both can be trusted in different ways, both can be ambitious, both can love racing. But only one has enough status to open the door without the team turning it into a larger decision. That is why Verstappen Nürburgring weekend still matters after the result disappeared. It showed the finished version of driver freedom. Antonelli showed the unfinished version. And Mercedes showed the difference between trusting a champion and protecting a future champion. That leads to the real question. If Antonelli keeps rising, how long can Mercedes keep saying not now before the answer starts to feel like limitation? Script 3, 10:30 to 1500. Start with the race. Verstappen did not enter Nürburgring as a symbolic name on a car. The number 3 Mercedes AMG GT3 had pace. It was part of the lead fight. The weekend became competitive before the technical failure ended the chance of victory. That proves the first point. This was not a publicity lap. It was a serious race attempt. Then look at the failure. A late problem with the car took away the result. But it did not take away the message. If anything, it made the message sharper. Because Max did not get praised for winning. He got attention because even without winning, he looked credible in a race that is brutally hard to master. That is why the comparison with Antonelli survived. The next piece is Mercedes. Antonelli reportedly wanted the Nordschleife permit path. Mercedes' response was not this year. Again, that is not a fake scandal. It is a real boundary. Mercedes did not need to attack the idea, it simply delayed it. And in Formula One, delaying something is often how a team keeps control without making the conflict look dramatic. That is the second proof. Mercedes is not denying Antonelli because the dream is meaningless. Mercedes is delaying it because the timing does not serve Mercedes yet. Then comes the third piece, the Formula One context. Mercedes needs Antonelli focused on the program in front of him. The next races, the car development, the qualifying pressure, the race execution, the internal trust. That is where his value is being built, not at the Nordschleife yet. So the Mercedes logic is clear. No extra risk, no extra distraction, no unnecessary comparison with Max. That is not cowardice, it is control. And control is the part this story exposes. Max can choose a dangerous challenge because he already owns his status. Antonelli cannot yet choose the same challenge because Mercedes still owns the timing of his rise. That is the hidden insight. This was never only about talent. It was about ownership of risk. Who carries the consequence if something goes wrong? For Max, the answer is mostly Max. For Antonelli, the answer is Mercedes. That is why the same ambition gets two different reactions. Max chasing Nürburgring becomes authentic, Antonelli chasing Nürburgring becomes complicated. And that difference tells you where both drivers stand. For Verstappen, this adds another layer to the image he already has. He is not just a Formula One champion, he is a racing obsessive. He wants competition that is difficult, dangerous, and not perfectly controlled. That matters for Red Bull because it reminds everyone that Max is not emotionally dependent on Formula One alone. He does not need every part of his identity to come from a Grand Prix weekend. That does not mean he is leaving Red Bull. That does not mean he is walking away from Formula One tomorrow. It means his power is different. A driver who feels bigger than the structure is harder to manage than a driver still trying to earn his place inside it. Antonelli is still earning, and Mercedes is still shaping. That is why this story matters for him too. Because if he keeps improving, the conversation will come back. Maybe not Nürburgring, maybe not this year, maybe not even through endurance racing, but at some point every great driver asks for more room, more freedom, more trust, more control over his own path. And when Antonelli reaches that point, Mercedes will have to decide whether he is still a protected project or a driver powerful enough to choose risk for himself. That is the future tension. Mercedes may be right today. The Nordschleife is dangerous, the Formula One season matters more. Antonelli does not need that risk right now. But the cost of protection is that it can slow down the very instinct that makes a driver special. That is why Verstappen is the perfect mirror. He shows what freedom looks like after dominance. Antonelli shows what ambition looks like before full power. And Mercedes shows what happens when a team has to choose between encouraging hunger and controlling exposure. So no, Max did not win Nürburgring, but he still made the weekend matter. He made a non-Formula One race feel connected to the Formula One power structure. He made Antonelli interest feel natural. And he made Mercedes' answer feel more revealing than Mercedes probably intended. Because the real question is not whether Antonelli should race at Nürburgring tomorrow. The real question is when Mercedes will trust him enough to choose the kind of risk that made Verstappen different. And until that answer changes, this story stays open. Max has already walked through the door. Antonelli is still waiting outside it. The pattern is simple. The same risk looks different depending on who wants to take it. For Max Verstappen, Nürburgring looked like a racing challenge. For Kimi Antonelli, Nürburgring became a Mercedes decision. That difference explains the whole story. Max is not treated like a normal Formula One driver anymore. He is already a multiple world champion. His value has been proven in title fights, pressure races, teammate comparisons, and seasons where Red Bull needed him to turn difficult weekends into damage limitation. That history gives him space. When Max wants to race somewhere else, the conversation is not just about permission. It is about what a champion has earned the right to do. Antonelli is in a different place. He may be one of the most important young drivers Mercedes has had in years, but that is exactly why Mercedes has to manage him more carefully. A future star is not handled like a finished champion. A future star is protected, timed, and shaped. That is why the Mercedes response makes sense. If Antonelli went to the Nordschleife and something went wrong, it would not stay a GT racing story. It would become a Mercedes Formula One story immediately. If he crashed, the question would be why Mercedes allowed it. If he struggled, the comparison with Verstappen would grow. If he impressed, the hype would grow before Mercedes might want it to. Every result creates noise. That is the important detail. Mercedes was not rejecting Nürburgring as a race. Mercedes-AMG had just won the Nürburgring 24 hours with another car. The brand had every reason to celebrate the event, so the issue was not the track alone. The issue was Antonelli carrying that risk while still being built as part of the Formula One project. That is hierarchy, and hierarchy is how Formula One works. Freedom is not equal in the paddock. It depends on titles, leverage, contract value, team trust, and how much damage a team can absorb if something goes wrong. Max can take the risk because his career does not need that race to explain itself. Antonelli cannot take the same risk yet because Mercedes is still writing the story around him, That is the core conflict. One driver already owns his narrative. The other is still inside a team narrative, and that is why the phrase "not this year" matters. Mercedes did not need to say never, it only needed to say not now. Not now means Formula One comes first. Not now means the team controls the timing. Not now means the risk does not serve the plan today. That is a rational decision, but rational decisions can still reveal power. Because when Max wants a difficult race, it looks like passion. When Antonelli wants one, it becomes a team meeting. That is the difference between freedom and permission. And Nürburgring makes that difference impossible to hide. This is not just a circuit, it is a test of judgment. It is long, narrow, dangerous, and full of traffic. It rewards patience, adaptation, and respect for danger. That is why Max doing it mattered. He was not chasing a sponsor moment. He was chasing a kind of racing that Formula One does not really offer anymore. Formula One is controlled, structured, and heavily managed. Nürburgring is messy, physical, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Max wanted that version. Antonelli wanting the same challenge makes racing sense too. A young driver wants credibility, a young driver wants hard tests. A young driver wants to prove he can do more than the protected Formula One environment. But Mercedes is not paid to satisfy every racing instinct. Mercedes is paid to protect its Formula One program. That is the contradiction. Teams say they want hungry drivers. They sell bravery. They sell ambition. They sell the idea that their young stars live for racing. But when that hunger moves outside the controlled Formula One world, teams become very careful. Mercedes wants Antonelli brave, but Mercedes wants that bravery inside the plan. That is not an insult, that is business, and it reframes the story. This is not mainly about whether Antonelli should race at Nürburgring. It is about who owns the risk. When Max races there, the risk belongs mostly to Max. His titles are won, his reputation is strong. If the car fails, people still see that he was competitive. When Antonelli wants to go there, the risk belongs to Mercedes. His image is still developing, his Formula One story is still being introduced. His mistakes still become team questions. That is the hidden mechanism. Mercedes is not only asking whether Antonelli can handle the Nordschleife, Mercedes is asking whether it wants to own every possible outcome. A crash would be a Mercedes question. A poor weekend would be a Mercedes question. A distraction before important Formula One races would be a Mercedes question. So Mercedes says no for now, and by saying no, it shows the boundary. Max is treated like someone who can choose his own risk. Antonelli is treated like someone whose risk still belongs to the team. That does not mean Mercedes doubts his talent. It means Mercedes values his future enough to control the timing. But that is the uncomfortable part. Protection and control often look the same from the outside. Max has the keys, Antonelli is still waiting for permission. Both can be talented, both can be ambitious, both can love racing, but only one has enough status to open that door without the team turning it into a bigger decision. That is why Verstappen Nürburgring weekend still matters after the result disappeared. It showed what driver freedom looks like after dominance. Antonelli showed what ambition looks like before full power. And Mercedes showed the difference between trusting a champion and protecting a future champion. So the real question is not whether Mercedes made the safe call. It probably did. The harder question is how long safe can stay safe before it starts to look like limitation.